Students, we are going to discuss the nervous system today, and we will have the general introduction to the nervous system, what are the basic structure and functions of the nervous system, the major significance and the properties of the nervous system. Then we will see what are the different components of the nervous system, including the type of the cells that are nervous cells or non-nervous cells. Then we will also discuss about different types of the nervous system based on different criteria. Right, so let's start today's lecture. This is the first lecture in this chapter, and in the second lecture next week we will discuss about the action potential and nerve impulse transmission and synaptic transmission. Right, so without any further ado, let's start with the question that why nervous system is required for the multicellular or in fact in the chordate animals. So as we have studied earlier, that along the evolutionary pathway, as the animal becomes more complex and more enlarged in body, it requires some specific system to coordinate its normal functioning and body uh, activities, right? So we did see that earlier in the unicellular organisms there was no specific nervous system, then that some nerve cells or some rudimentary nerve receptors evolved in the animals like jellyfish, which could only sense the light. Then the light sensitive pigments evolved in the animals. Then that lead towards the development of the nervous ganglion, as in platyhelminthes. Then later in earthworms, they had the nerves, lateral nerves, and swollen anterior parts that were considered as the brain. And this development continued with the passage of time until we reached to the chordates, where the particularly brain has been developed further and have the multiple nerves coming out from the brain and spread it into the body. So this way, this highly advanced nervous system is uh, has become the control center of the body activities. Right, so the nervous system is required to respond and adapt to the changes that occurs both in the internal body and from the outside or in the outer environment of the animal. So basically nervous system does three functions, three things. It communicates, it integrates, and it coordinates. Now what is communication? Anything which you communicate or use any message which is transmitted between different organisms, that is called communication. Or is there any form of the communication that occurs within the animal's body? This is my question. Just think of that question for a minute. Let me reflect on that. So, sort of the chemical communication that happens within the body in the form of uh, hormones and other chemical components, that is also the part of the animal's communication within the body, right? And between the or animals or between the individuals, animals use different languages or different sound waves or electrical impulses or all these different types of the communication means that are controlled by the nervous system. The second is to integrate. As the animal's body becomes more complex, it has many systems that has to be coordinated from the normal body functioning. Like if the animal has excessive activity, it needs more blood supply, it needs more nutrients in their bloods, and it needs more oxygen or the more blood to be filtered through the lungs. So the two or three different systems have to perform their function collectively. So this all integration happens by the help of the nervous system. And third one is the coordination, that the brain helps in learning, coordinating the body activities and internal systems. So in this way, so basically all the activities the animal is doing without noticing or automatically, there is the nervous system as a control center behind it, right? So let's start with the functions of the nervous system. What are the main functions? The first one is the sensory input. The nervous system provides the sensory, receives the sensory input and then process that information in the brain to do the required action against those sensory inputs. There are different sensory input devices present in the animal's body that are known as sensory receptors. Right. So, for example, there are temperature sensitive receptors, taste receptors, smell receptors, or taste buds, sound receptors like your ear, some other blood pressure receptors, pH of the body fluids can be measured by some specific receptors on specific cells. Similarly, there are some balancing devices present in the internal air of the chordate animals that helps the animal to balance and maintain its body position. Right? So all of the different sensory inputs, there are specific sensory receptors that receives all those information and send it to the brain for further processing. The second function is the integration. The brain and spinal cord, which are the basically main nervous main parts of the nervous system, they are the major organs for processing sensory inputs and initiating the responses accordingly, right? And the shortest cycle from where the information is received, processed, and responded against is known as the reflex arc, where there are only 3 neurons are involved, or sometimes even 2 neurons can do that function, where the sensory neuron receives the information, the interneuron processes the information, and the motor neuron sends that information back to your effectors or your muscles to perform accordingly. The very well-known example is touching a hot surface or hot water or hot glass or hot pot, anything, and then once you touch it, you instantaneously retract your arm or your hand to avoid any further damage. So this is part of the integration at a very basic level, but the more complex information such as that involves multiple inputs like sights, vision, sounds, that needs a complex processing, so that information travels through the multiple sensory input neurons towards the brain, and the brain processes that information accordingly, and it can either respond or can postpone that response or can just memorize the new information or remember that for the future reference. Right, so then third function is the homeostasis. So homeostasis is the process by which the animal maintains the internal environment at a constant level. This involves maintaining the body temperature, it involves maintaining the water levels, it involves the salt concentrations within the blood and body fluids, mm, uh, other nutrient concentrations, byproduct concentrations like salt, urea, sugar, sugar levels. They're all different types of the levels present in the body fluids and in the cell. So these are maintained by the process known as homeostasis, and brain is the main control center of the homeostasis. Right, so the regulatory and coordinated activities of the brain helps to maintain its homeostatic position. The trillions of cells that have to work together to maintain homeostasis are controlled by the nervous system. Right? So here is an example that heart cell must contract at the rate to ensure the supply of the blood to each and every part of the body, and it should be able to change the heart contraction rate based on the activity of the animal. If the animal is running, chasing a prey or something, with more blood pumps through the body, so the heart have to work hard. Similarly, the skeletal muscles of respiratory system must contract at the rate that ensures the oxygenation of the blood, like enough air is inhaled or exhaled at a particular rate so that the oxygen levels are maintained within the blood. Kidney cells has to respond accordingly to the presence of different byproducts in the blood, and also has to be able to filter the specific amount of urine in a day to maintain the internal body conditions. Right, so this is how the nervous system can stimulate and inhibit the activities of these and other structures to help maintain homeostatic conditions. Right, so until now we have of the nervous system that were, we just revise it, sensory, getting the sensory input, processing that information and doing the response action to that, integration of all that information that comes from the sensory inputs and then doing the according response, right? And then homeostasis is the third major function. The fourth one is the mental activity. The brain is the center of the mental activities, including consciousness, thinking, memory, and emotions. Right? So there are different activities that brain has to perform. One is the control of the muscles and glands. So the voluntary muscles, they are always under the control of the brain, but there are some involuntary muscles which are being controlled by the brain and nervous system without the involvement of the conscious of that animal. Right, so there are rhythmic contractions of the heart or stomach or blood vessels in the animal's body, so they're all maintained by the nervous system. Similarly, the endocrine system, that again is controlled by the central nervous system, like sweat glands, salivary glands, or the digestive glands, reproductive glands. So they all release their hormones upon the command from the central nervous system, and this is a part of the homeostatic process. So that was about the basic functions and significance of the nervous system.